Bees, millions of bees. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is season 4, episode 24, and it's the summer, and we normally like to relax a bit with our format. In past summers, we've indulged in some lighter fare like classic sci-fi and blockbusters. And this summer, we are following that trend with some 70s disaster movies. So join us as we discuss the 1978 Michael Caine film, The Swarm. We just watched a pandemic movie, so why not follow it with murder hornets or murder bees or whatever. So I am going to actually turn this over to Lisa to give us a quick summation of the film because her summation of it is a pretty good one.
Yeah, so first let me say about this movie. I did not realize when I watched it that I accidentally watched the extended cut. So I got a good 2 hours and 36 minutes of this film, which was too much, quite honestly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of boil that down for our listeners who may not have seen The Swarm. Bees attack. People just fall down. Bees are remarkably good at taking down helicopters and trains, which happens quite a bit in the movie. A few kids die. A few more kids hide under big metal trash cans. The bee stings make you hallucinate giant bees that look like they're straight out of a 50s monster matinee movie. One lady's scream moans. A lot of men argue and talk on the phone. Michael Caine, who is in this movie, yells a lot that he is to be listened to. Again, it happens a lot. Then there's a train crash. There's a pregnant Patty Duke who just walks on, barely gets on the train, and then starts to have her baby. Horny bees destroy small Texas towns. But the men are really mad when they go after Houston. The men, by the way, are these like vaguely military men, but they run around half the time in these spacesuit looking things. Finally, they decide in Houston that they are going to get rid of the bees with flamethrowers. This results in the military men setting themselves on fire with the flamethrowers, but unfortunately, the bees are smarter and don't get burned. Finally, we made it to the end of the movie where pontoon boats with giant boom boxes replicate the horny bee sounds and bring the bees away from all the people. And there is a big explosion. And then the movie finally ends. I don't know, guys. How did I do summing up that movie?
It was a Herculean task, but you rose to the occasion. That movie was all over the place. Even though it was pretty much confined to a small Texas town in Houston, it was all over the place.
Oh yeah, I couldn't really figure out what I was watching. For a lot of it, I knew that there were bees, and yet I was never really sufficiently scared of the bees in the film because so much of it took place like indoors and just people like talking on the phone and watching like radar style videos. And they kept pointing to things and they'd be like, "This is Houston. This is where the bees are." But I don't know. It didn't quite have the suspenseful impact that I thought maybe a disaster film should. I don't know. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this, Matt and Mel.
I guess I'll go first. It well, like I said, it was all over the place. I think I watched the extended cut too, because my version that I watched was 2.5 hours as well. And yeah, like I kept wondering, as we have wondered on previous episodes this summer, why it is that these 70s disaster movies are so long and yet nothing happens, because there was so much of nothing happening. But there were some good moments, I thought, that punctuated throughout it, but just not enough to make it overall a good movie. I mean, the dialogue's terrible. The deliveries are not great. It doesn't make much sense, but there were like moments like when the bees swarm on the small Texas town, and like they flat out kill a bunch of school kids like with the bees on camera, and I'm like, okay, that is some resolve that we did not see in, say, the Cassandra Crossing, where they almost kill the kids, but they come back because they all develop immunity or whatever. So, like, I don't know. Some of the bee attack scenes were kind of good. Some of them were hokey as heck, and overall, it was a whole lot of things that happened, and none of it made much sense.
Yeah, I agree with Matt. I mean, one of the things I thought was really interesting when I was looking up a little the background on this movie is that, and I think this is kind of a good way to be ending our 70s disaster films, at least, is because we started with, this icon, the Poseidon Adventure, which had the involvement of producer Irwin Allen, who also directed some of the action scenes. And then, of course, Irwin Allen was also involved in The Towering Inferno, which we also talked about. And those were two movies that had, multiple Oscar nominations, a few wins amongst them, because they had their signature pop songs that all the 70s disaster movies, except for The Swarm, apparently had. But Irwin Allen was involved in this movie. He was the producer and the director of it, and this was a box office flop. So compared, it basically kind of seems like, compared to the beginning of the 70s, where people were super excited about, Poseidon Adventure, Airport, Towering Inferno. By the time you get to 78, you've got what, like three airports, I guess, at that point, because you got like Airport and then Airport 75, and then there's like Airport Concord somewhere in there, and there's another one. Um, and then, of course, you have the Cassandra Crossing. And so it's like we just keep having these movies kind of trying to follow this formula with a lot of the same things. And it just seems like audiences got kind of tired. And it also seemed like the adaptations of these books was getting tired. I mean, this script was just, there wasn't really a lot of like explication or connection with anything that was happening. Just like you said, Matt, I mean, it's very episodic. There was no reason why sometimes people would just start yelling at each other. It was just like, we need some action here. Um, and in one of the articles I read, I think it was from Den of Geek, they talked about how Irwin Allen just never really talked about this movie like ever again after it flopped. And so I think we kind of associate him with maybe those earlier disaster films and their successes. And I know other people, we were talking before we started recording about how other people like Michael Caine kind of, gave excuses for why they did the movie. A lot of famous people were in it. I needed the cash kind of thing. So, I think this is a case of Irwin Allen trying to um, catch that kind of magic in a bottle again with a disaster film and getting a whole load of famous people in it. And then let me see. One more thing with my first impressions is that this movie is chock-a-block full of famous people. You have Michael Caine and Catherine Ross. Of course, Catherine Ross was in Stepford Wives, which is a movie we've talked about before. She's also in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. She is a good actress, so you couldn't tell by watching this. Richard Widmark was the military guy who would just constantly be yelling with Michael Caine, and they would both be yelling like things that made no sense. He apparently wanted to, like napalm America, I guess, and like make it to where nothing would ever grow again, just to try to kill these bees. You have Richard Chamberlain, a previous Towering Inferno bad guy, here is a good guy. Olivia de Havilland, who just celebrated her 104th birthday, I think, last week. She was in this. Ben Johnson was in it. Lee Grant, Patty Duke, of course. Slim Pickens had a super minor role. Fred McMurray was in it. Henry Fonda had a role as a doctor, and the one scene with him testing out the injection or the anti venom, I thought was one of those moments in the movie that could have worked had it been in a better film, better larger film. But I'll say this and then go back to you, Lisa. This movie was not afraid to kill people. Like we've been talking with every movie. Well, a few people died. There was some threat. A couple people died. I mean, this movie, like you said, Matt, was like killing children. And basically, of every person who's in the movie, they all die except for Michael Caine and Catherine Ross. And it's really unclear as to whether Catherine Ross is going to make it. And I don't think she would have in real life because they were these pretty harrowing situations and escaped scot free. But yeah, I mean, anybody who was anybody in this film, and then all the extras, it seems, got stung or had their train derail or got set on fire by a comrade and then fell out a window. There was very Towering Inferno vibes there at the end when the bees got in the building. But yeah, when I was watching it, I was like, man, this is definitely hitting that Lisa rule of disaster films where we need a bunch of people to actually die.
I mean, but did it like? See, this is what drove me crazy. Is yes, there was death, but I feel like there were only 2 instances where I actually felt distress at watching people die, because even when the kids would die, it was like, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's just because it was bees, but like they just kind of laid down. Like there was no I don't know. It felt very anticlimactic to me. I don't know.
You needed their deaths to be more violent.
It's a disaster movie.
Maybe it's because you didn't care about them, because that's also a possibility.
Well, and that really may be it. It's because that is what I worry about with some of these disaster films, and why I get bored with them just in general, is because there are no stakes a lot of the times, because you don't get to know any like personal stakes. I get that there are like grand stakes. The city of Houston that's a pretty big stake, but I think it's because it's the personal stakes are never established. And so, yeah, I'm going to be sad to see school children, like just late. But in the end, it just looks like they just laid down in the playground. But maybe I was just distracted by all the scream moaning that was happening. Because really, the only 2 deaths that felt impactful to me was the first one was when the little boy watched his parents on the picnic. But again, I had something personal like with them, because you had watched this whole like little family scene play out. And then the other one was when the doctor did the antidote, or tried to test the antidote on himself, and you thought it was going to work, but then in the end it didn't, and he died anyway. And again, because you had followed that doctor through a good part of the movie. But again, maybe it's just my problem with disaster movies, is that it just, you don't get to know some of these people, and so they just feel like, oh well, there's another guy who fell down. I don't know, it just feels anticlimactic. But you're right, there were a lot of people died in this movie, which if you had told me at the beginning of this, if we were looking at a sinking ship or an apartment building on fire or a swarm of bees, I would not have put the high death count on the Swarm of Bees movie. So anyway.
Same. I would not have put it on the Swarm of Bees either. Yeah, I do agree though. The scene with the picnic deaths, that one was a pretty well done one. Partly because they did have the actors actually covered in bees. This was the 70s, and so they weren't using computer generated anything. It was real bees, and that. But I think part of the problem, and it might just be the genre, or it might just be the 70s disaster movies, but the cast just feels too big. Like there's so much going on, and so many different threads of stories with this ensemble casts, that it becomes hard to really focus in on anybody and really have any sort of caring about them, whether they live or die, because they're also undeveloped. Like there was this love triangle thing going on between the mayor and the school teacher, and I think the other guy was the principal. that's kind of like tossed around a little bit, and then they all die on a train crash. Like there's just no, like there's no stakes, I guess. And I'm trying to think of like more recent disaster movies that also tend to have like ensemble casts, but I guess they focus on particular characters better in a way that makes you actually feel a little more connected to them, as opposed to just throwing out like a whole big roster of big names, Fred McMurray and Michael Caine and Slim Pickens in a cameo, just Henry Fonda. Like instead of focusing on all of that, they should have focused on the actual characters, I guess.
I think I think you just hit the nail on the head with that, Matt, actually, because yeah, I mean, number one, an ensemble cast, it's hard to pull off good characterization. Number one, just because you've got so many characters and there were so many subplots going on that it was hard to. I had forgotten that there was a love triangle until you started talking about it.
Because it didn't matter. It just
It didn't
they toss it
matter.
out and then nothing happened with it. So,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, the struggle with having cameos in these type of movies is you run the risk of either A, it's going to be a really fun thing for the audience, like, oh, hey, look who it is on the screen. Okay, they're gone now. Or it can be really confusing because if I see a big name on the screen, I tend to think, oh, okay, this is an important character. I need to pay attention. And then, like, I did that with the Patty Duke character, where I was just like, oh, okay, this is going to be a whole new thing. They're going to bring her in. She's pregnant, blah, blah, blah. And then literally nothing happened with her. I mean, we watched her walk to a couple of different places, and that was
they did
it.
they did mention that her husband had died not too long before,
That
but
was it.
again, nothing's done with it. She doesn't even seem all that sad. I mean, just kind
No.
of.
She was just like, "Oh, yes." They were like, "I'm sorry for your loss." And, "Oh, yes, thank you." It was very odd. And I think that's the problem is because you're not sure, okay, which of these characters, storylines that you're introducing, which ones are going to pay off in the end because a lot of them didn't. And I think that added to some of the trouble too is if maybe she had just been somebody who like went down with the bees in the end, that kind of like cameo or something that might have been a bit more fun. But when you were trying to introduce just a little bit of her character's backstory, it didn't make sense. It didn't. I think you're right. I think that is it. That is the problem with these type of movies.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something that we've seen, as you mentioned, Matt, from the very beginning of these disaster films, especially Airport, where I think we even talked in that episode about how we felt like we didn't have enough information on these people because there were just so many people to keep track of. Even that end when the woman finds out that her pilot husband is having a child with another woman and leaving her, they just basically had her run in to hear that and be shocked that her character had something going on. Um, and yeah, it just there's not a lot of character development. Patty Duke doesn't really seem to care about the death of her husband. She falls immediately in love with Jose Ferrer, the doctor. Um, I'm still not sure why Michael Caine and Catherine Ross's characters fell in love, other than the fact that they're a male doctor and a woman doctor who happen to be on the scene at the same time. I still don't really understand why Catherine Ross. I mean, not that you can't care about a child, but Catherine Ross is almost like a mother toward Paul, the little boy who inexplicably relapses. He just is in the. We see him running around, and all of a sudden he's in the hospital again. She says something about how he was like her first patient when she got a job as a doctor in the town, but there's no like what? How would that? Like, she seems way closer to him than I would have thought. And yeah, there's just no development. Even the arguments between the general and Michael Caine, which I get, I mean, in a way, could have handled ecological disaster in a really interesting way. About maybe like I don't know, I'm trying to help them here, but like an invading species overtaking another one. The general literally is like a stereotype of the military, just wanting to. He'll kill people with pesticides if it'll kill these bees. He doesn't care. And so you end up with this cartoonish, weird debate where the general just keeps yelling that something needs to be done. He also talks about how the bees are smarter than them and will come back to rescue their captured comrades. I mean, he sounds like he has some issues. And then Michael Caine basically just yells, if you use this pesticide, you will kill all the people and all the crops, and we will have nothing growing for 10 years, and we won't have any American bees, and we need the American bees. They just pause and like scream this stuff at each other with no explanation of each side or compromise or anything. So not even the stakes of the disaster are that high. Even at the end, when they actually do torch everything, when they use the pesticide all over the towns and they didn't necessarily evacuate them, nobody seems to care about the fact that there still could be people in the towns around Houston. They're having this poison fall on their heads, or the fact that the poison is killing the plants. So they don't have good characterization, and then they also don't even really explain the stakes of the actual disaster that they're facing. And then at the end of the movie, when they think they might have killed the bees, which I don't know why the bees would get burned by the oil slick when they're above it, when they didn't get burned by, being above the flamethrowers. They're just like, we bought ourselves a few years and then we'll have to go through this all over again. So maybe they just needed to not use bees at all, but I feel like maybe they could have explained the debates they're having, because every time they did have a debate, it was just, even the debate between the scientists wasn't fleshed out enough to even make any sense. It was just like they felt like they needed some conflict, so some people were going to yell at each other every now and then.
Well, I think that's exactly it, and we've seen that play out in some of these other disaster movies too, where it's just sort of two people with opposing ideas yelling at each other. But this is, I think, even worse than the others, because there really is no movement, no consequence, no nothing. It's just two people who disagree yelling, and then something else happens. And yeah, like I've been thinking about like other ensemble movies, not necessarily disaster movies, and I think the fault is not that this movie is an ensemble. It's just that there's no unity to it. Like if you look at something like Love Actually or something, those are characters that are fleshed out, that you actually start to care for and you want to see good things happen for them. I didn't really care about any of these characters because I didn't feel like I knew them. Like Michael Caine was an entomologist who happened to be at the army base. Like, maybe I missed it, but that it was never really explained. And then there's some military people that disagree with him. Like you said, very stereotypical military guy who just wants results and doesn't care how many eggs he has to break. And then just random people. Like that's what they felt like. Just random people. I thought that they were going to do something more interesting with the kid, Paul, since he watched his parents die, stole their car, not really stole because they were dead by that point, but took the car, drove into town surprisingly well, despite the fact that the sound effects made it sound like he was careening all over the place. The car itself was actually driving pretty well. Then, like, nothing. Like, he tries to go get revenge with his friends, throws Molotov cocktails on the bees and relapses and dies. Like, I don't know. It's like not even the kids were interesting. Or I didn't really care when he died either. And normally I'm like, don't kill the kid. But this, meh, whatever. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, well, and even like the characters that we follow through the whole movie, like Michael Caine's character, I watched him for 2.5 hours and I could not tell you anything other than he's an entomologist and he's really into bees. Like you get nothing about really who he is.
He likes brown suits.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and he yells at a lot of people, and he gives side eye throughout the movie a whole lot. Like the military man will say something and he'll just like cut his eyes over, and then the camera's really close to his face, and But at the same time, I'm just like, I know nothing about you. Like, I know nothing about why you started studying bees, or I don't know. Like, normally there's some sort of like monologue about, like, this is why, I started studying this. This is the
I'm
I don't know.
so
I'm even
into bees because bees killed my parents.
right.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that. You're expecting it to hear something, why he has been tracking them. Or even there was a moment where the military guy, see, I can't even remember anybody's names in this movie because I just didn't care that much. Um, but the head military guy who really hates Michael Caine, um, he at one point had like another military guy following Michael Caine and like looking into him because he was convinced that, I guess, Michael Caine was some sort of spy, or was like not really saying who he was. And the guy, the army guy, the military guy, whoever he was, brought it up several times throughout the film, to the point that I thought, oh, this is going to be something they pull out, like, three-quarters of the way through the film. Like, we're going to think Michael Caine is the hero, and then we're going to learn that he's really not. And then they didn't do anything with it. It was just, no, he's still the like hero, and he's going to be the one to figure it out, and or I guess figure it out, because yeah, you're right. They didn't really get rid of the threat because the bees are going to keep coming back. I don't know.
Yeah, they had multiple missed opportunities with Michael Caine's characterization and backstory. Because I also wondered to say, because they also noted that he was like, he would act so suspicious and odd when they would be in the room with the dead bodies, which obviously someone would be overcome at that. You'd be a robot if you didn't care. But like when he had his big speech where he yelled about how his entire life he always thought there would finally be a battle between humans and insects. He just didn't think it would come during his lifetime, and he didn't think it'd be the bees. And then he almost like gets teary eyed, is like, the bees are our friends. And I was like, what is this guy's motivation? Because I started to wonder if he was going to say he helped the bees or something. I mean, I know that's insane, but like maybe he caused this
Well, that's
somehow on
I thought
purpose or
the same
accidentally,
thing.
but they don't do anything with it.
I thought this is going to be a case of, he loved the bees so much and thought they were going to like help somehow. I thought maybe he's going to turn this into like an eco terrorism type thing, where it's like, we've done such bad damage to the environment. I need to help things get back to their original state, and the bees can do that. And so I was like, oh yeah, it's going to come out that, he released the bees or something. And yeah, nothing like that was I could not figure it out. It was almost like, it almost got to the point of like, I keep thinking of like Jurassic Park, or like the whole like life will find a way type of speech. And it was like, it almost got there, because you're right, he did get teary-eyed, but at the same time it didn't, and it just sounded like a man rambling on about how much he loved bees.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and there's another missed opportunity with this characterization too, because remember, Paul gets upset because he realizes the 232 people who are dead are his fault because he threw Molotov cocktails at the bees, and he runs and gets Michael Caine's character and admits to him it was his fault. And Michael Caine says that he understands precisely why he did that because he had a similar experience. And he starts telling him the story. And I'm like, oh my God, this is where we get the story where something happened to him as a child with bees, which is why he did this. And he proceeds to tell the kid that he was an orphan because his parents died in a house fire. And that's totally sad. But it doesn't, how does that identify with the kid throwing Molotov cocktails at the bees? And how did, like, I didn't understand, like, the script would do these weird things where you would think it was going one way, and then the person would say something that that literally had like nothing to do with the conversation at hand. Like, that's not going to make Paul feel better, you know?
Yeah. No, it's not. And it doesn't make us feel better either while we're watching.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I almost felt a little creeped out for Catherine Ross's character that she was getting close to Michael Caine because I was like, you don't know who he is. Like, he just appeared in his van at the military installation after it got attacked by the bees. Yet she was telling him way more about herself than he was telling her. So yeah, it was very the dialogue and the plotting was like so stilted and almost robotic that it was hard not to just be suspicious the whole time of everybody because nobody was ever truly fully explained.
Which is so surprising to me that the dialogue, I mean, the script was so terrible. I mean, the that romance felt, or almost romance, I don't know what you would call it, but it felt very forced, like a lot of the relationships in this film did. But I didn't look up how much it cost to make, but it must have been staggering because the amount, I mean, first of all, to have that many bees and be dealing with them, but they blew up so many helicopters and trains and crashed so many cars. It was kind of breathtaking. Like, this must have been an expensive film to make for the script to be so bad.
Yeah, I'm just looking now at the Wikipedia page. Of course, this is the Wikipedia page, but it says that was it just estimates of the numbers of bees used in the production range between 15 million and 22 million. That's the bees. And there was about 100 people who were employed just to take care of the bees. And in the Den of Geek article, they talked about how they took 800,000 of the bees, froze them basically, like would lowered their body temperatures and then cut their stingers off. So when you see the bees actually attacking people, the stingerless bees are the ones that are doing that. And according to the Wikipedia article, Olivia de Havilland was the only one stung. But I saw the part about the 800,000 bees being frozen and de-stingered in two other places than Wikipedia, which I thought, I don't know. I don't know what the ethics of that are, but that seemed kind of sad for the poor bees. But I mean, if you've got that many bees and you're paying 100 people to work on this, I mean, in one place on here, it says that the budget was what, 11 million, which I mean, now would be twice that, right? That's a lot to put into this movie to then have it be a flop.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it is. It kind of that yeah. I can't fathom losing that kind of money on that because I don't know what it must have made, but it must not have made a lot. I just can we talk about the bees themselves for a minute because they did some crazy things with these bees. Um like this film, okay, I think I compared it at one point in my notes to mainly when the teacher scream moaned. And for those of you listening who have not seen this movie, just look up scream moan and the swarm, and it will probably pull up a clip of it because it was just the weirdest thing I've ever seen. It was when the teacher, she was like looking out and she saw some of her students lying there dead, which must have been terrible. And um she does this like horrible, like guttural scream. And I thought that part of the film was really interesting to me because it reminded me a lot, somehow the way she was, like the camera was positioned to her, it reminded me of the birds quite a bit.
And the telephone booth scene,
And
yeah.
the telephone booth scene, yes, that's what I was thinking of. And I thought, that's what this movie was missing, is with the birds, because the birds, like having birds attack you and having bees attack you, like those to me feel like very similar style of films. And I think why the birds is effective and maybe the swarm is not, is the birds was so much more intimate. And that was one of the only really truly intimate moments I felt like we got. Like there were a couple of others. I mentioned the two deaths that really kind of stuck out to me. Those might be intimate, but the if we had had kind of a few more scenes, or if it had been a smaller movie where we had only followed a few characters as they did in the birds, but where you really saw somebody trying to fight off the bees. I think that would have been much more effective than just watching this massive swarm move from place to place, because at some point it didn't feel scary. Well, it didn't feel scary at all to me. Um, I mean, does that make sense? Like, if you had somebody who had like trapped themselves somewhere, like a closet, trying to escape all of this, and they think they've gotten away, and then suddenly you hear like a buzz, and they're looking around, they're trying to figure out where it's coming from. Or maybe like one kind of sneaks in underneath the door, the crack in the door, and they can kind of swat it away and kill it, but then another one comes, and then another and another. And if it's that kind of like intimacy, I feel like this would have felt scary. But instead, they took a complete left turn, and they tried to pull the horror from this by not only having a huge body count, which again we've talked about can kind of have the opposite effect because you just don't connect to anybody, but having the people hallucinate the giant bees. Like, the first time I saw it, it was genuinely kind of like, oh my gosh, what was that? But then after that, I was just like, what are they doing here? Like, I couldn't figure out why the people were seeing them, for one. I don't know. What did y'all think about that? That's such a weird choice to me, to
It
have them hallucinate the giant bees.
it made no sense to me whatsoever. Like, I get that if you are extremely sick or having an extreme reaction to uh, the toxin in the bee sting and all that you might be hallucinating. Fine, but for all of them to hallucinate the same gigantic bee made no sense. And I was even worried that they were going to do something like this is some sort of shared hallucination, and have something even more with the plot going with that. But I guess they weren't sci-fi enough to do that, which is good, because that would have been a terrible, terrible choice. But yeah, it made no sense to me.
Yeah, I didn't get it either. I felt like one of the big drawbacks of the movie, because I mean, I enjoyed the swarm entertained me in ways that Cassandra Crossing didn't. Cassandra Crossing, I was kind of like just staring at it because I felt like not a lot was going on. The swarm, what was going on was crazy, and I was laughing during much of it. But at least things were happening. There was, I guess, that's Irwin Allen action for you. But I thought that the hallucination of the bees was just completely over the top. It was like William Castle bee vision or something. I didn't get why it was happening. It seemed too gimmicky at first. When it was the kid seeing it, I thought it was just a poorly done way of showing that this child was traumatized. So I was willing to forgive it. But then when Catherine Ross's character was seeing it too, and then they said one of the symptoms was seeing a giant bee, I was, it just, I don't know. It was just too over the top. And I mean, the bee didn't even look that mean. It wasn't even trying to attack people. It would just hover there, and then they would like shut a door and it would go away. If you're hallucinating, it would come through the door. Like, it was just so preposterous. And it kind of almost played with the bizarre idea that the military dude had, that like the bees would come back and get the captured ones, like I mentioned earlier. Just stuff that was insane. Like, did the bees make their venom make hallucinations? Like, I don't understand how this would develop in an evolutionary way. And then, yeah, I agree with you, Lisa. If they had not thrown masses, I think that it is scary to see the parents covered with masses of bees while the kid is watching. And but these bees can kill a full grown person with three stings. They don't need to mass. Like, I don't know that they would necessarily need to do that or do that. And so every time they would come, there was no like jaws build up until you see them all at the end, or there was nothing like building up your fear. They literally, you could tell it was like a fan blowing these poor bees out of the tree every time they needed to attack someone, because it would just be clouds of bees literally falling, like flying out of the tree, not even of their own volition, um, to make it look like there were tons and tons of bees going to kill this town. The only time they I think they even tried to handle suspense properly was when the one bee ends up on the engineer's hand in the train, and then they're like, "Don't hit him, you'll make him mad. Don't hit him, you'll make him mad." And he hits him, and immediately millions of bees come in and kill them. It was just handled so ham-handedly that it almost became humorous rather than the horror that this train has been overwhelmed by all these bees. There's also no reason that the train conductor would have been blowing the horn every minute of their trip, calling the bees to them. I mean, it was just, there's, the more I talk about it, the more preposterous it all seems, this creature, and not really scary at all.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like hearing you talk about it and you say things like it was gimmicky and you're like it was almost like a William Castle, and I started to get angry because I was like, don't bring Castle into this.
Oh, I mean, I like castle movies, but that wasn't what I wanted in this one.
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess it did. It was like, yeah, I would have expected them to be like, okay, so at this point in the theater, you would have gotten stung in your butt, from the from the seat or something. Um, yeah, it was a weird mishmash because when you put that, and I think this is why it didn't work. I would have been fine if this had been a William Castle style movie and that was it. Like I probably would have relished that, but I think number one, it would have been a much shorter film and it would have been much more low budget. But what was so weird is the other scenes in it felt very almost like a modern disaster film. So like it opens with the military base and they're like talking back and forth to the people up in the air, and you realize that the planes are going down because the bees are like systematically attacking the planes, right? So it started off, and it would interchange with these scenes where it would be these very like high tech scenes and very you like you're seeing how smart these bees are, which I think was one of the things that was supposed to be so terrifying, was that these were not just insect bees. I guess they were very intelligent, and so they could figure things out. And every time they would come up, the military would come up with a plan to take out the bees would be like, oh, okay, they're too smart for that. Like they're not taking the bait, they're avoiding the poison, so that in and of itself can be a very terrifying situation. Um, but to then mix it in with this kind of gimmicky, almost like a throwback sci-fi type film, felt really weird because it was, well, you always hear this about bad movies, but it was a film that didn't know what it was. And I think that was one of its downfalls too. Like if it had just picked a lane and stayed in it the whole time, like it's either going to be this kind of high-tech thriller about military men trying to take down super smart bees. That's one thing. Or it's going to be about a small town that's under siege by bees that make you hallucinate giant bees. That's another movie. But those are different films. And so it felt really weird that it kept swerving in and out of both of them.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I think I'm wondering if that was even in like the making of the film. So, one of the things I saw when I was reading through is that in this particular film, well, and I think they actually have it in writing at the end of the movie, the Air Force was apparently like involved in the making of the movie, kind of like the fire, the fire department was involved in the Towering Inferno, and so yeah, you do seem to shift from this techno babble about the bees and how many stings, it takes 3 stings to kill a man, but Paul got stung twice and he's fine. Oh, he's not, and this weird, inexplicable hallucination with then, like you said, what appears to be an attempt at, yeah, like the military facing this daunting threat. It just needed a better script to make that clear. But yeah, you've got lots of airplanes, helicopters, really interesting aerial shots. At the end, even with the oil slick, like they've got like almost like it almost seems like Coast Guard cooperation at that point. So it's interesting because this movie, you've got bee experts and you've got military experts and you've got equipment and you're paying money for all this, and yet, yeah, it doesn't fit with the rest of the movie because you could have had the people in the town get killed, but then make the focus on the military trying to protect Houston. But over half the movie is trying to get us to care about Olivia de Havilland and Fred McMurray and I'm blanking on the other guy's name now, Love Affair, just to have them get killed in the train. So yeah, it is very much like a mashup of two different films. And maybe that helps to cause the script to become kind of clunky because you're moving back and forth between like almost two different worlds, but you're not necessarily developing either of them.
Well, Mel, all that aside, I do have to say, I know we've spent like this entire episode bashing and talking about how crazy this movie is, but I would 100% watch it again. Um, I wouldn't watch it by myself like I did this past time, but this is the kind of movie to put on with some friends and possibly have some copious amounts of alcohol and then laugh along to it. Also, would not get the extended version myself. I think that ran a bit too long, but yeah, I mean, this movie is nuts, but in the end, I actually kind of enjoyed its badness. Definitely way more than Cassandra Crossing. Like, what about you two?
No, I agree. It was a movie that was so bad it was good. I'll definitely watch it again. I would definitely watch it again with other people.
I don't know what's wrong with you two. I would not watch this movie again. In fact, it nearly killed me trying to get through it. Yeah, I loved. I mean, I always enjoy Michael Caine, even when he's in bad movies. I enjoy watching him. I was very happy to see Fred McMurray. Um, I wish that they had followed his character a bit more and not just have him die in a train crash brought on by bees. Um, yeah, I mean, this movie it killed my disaster movie rules. So you're right, Mel, that there was a lot of death, and that is always good for a disaster film. But there were kids and there were lovable elderly people, and I just didn't care when they fell on the ground. Um, there were men arguing with each other over who was trying to take charge, and yet I didn't care. Um, but when I look at my death rules that I had, I have them out in front of me. There was supposed to be like a sacrificial death or like the one that everybody loved and the one who almost makes it. And just in the end, I did not care about these characters' deaths. So that was problematic. And there was not enough, I think, people like climbing on things perilously dangling and saying, "Don't look down." Um, I mean, it was a missed opportunity. So um yeah, I wasn't feeling it. I'm not feeling it any. I would not watch this film again, even with friends, even for it was so bad, it's good. No, I would just say no, it's bad, and I would rather pick another one. Thanks.
Oh, come on. Someday when the pandemic is over, the three of us are going to get together in real life, in real personhood, and watch this movie
And
and
I'm
laugh.
gonna say no. Not no. You can't make me.
Anything
So
but the
On.
swarm.
anything but the swarm.
We'll make you see giant bees.
Uh, yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm very curious, very curious, very curious to know what our listeners think about this film. I know. I really, honestly would love to hear what our listeners think about this because if you've watched The Swarm, and again, I do not recommend it. If you do watch it, that is on Matt and Mel. That is not on me. But if you do watch it or you have seen it before, I'm curious to know what you think. So please consider dropping us a note. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram. We also have a Facebook page. So if you search No Fear Cast, you can find us there. If you'd like to contact us by email, you can send an email at nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon and getting access to exclusive bee-free content, or simply rate and review us, which is entirely free for you, but it does help other listeners find us, and we cannot stress enough how much it helps us when people will just click those stars or leave a little review for us. That would be very much appreciated. Thanks for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks. And Matt and Mel have promised they're not making me watch The Swarm again, so it's going to be a brand new episode.